What if the truth of action cinema was never meant to be shouted from theater speakers, but whispered in the flicker of tapes that almost nobody rented twice? In the late years of the Cold War and the anxious dawn of the new millennium, studios kept feeding audiences the same polished heroes, the same sanitized missions, the same stories where the world was always saved by the right man at the right time. But while the spotlight stayed fixed on the blockbusters, another layer of action was being shot on smaller sets, with lower budgets and far fewer rules. These were films about rogue soldiers and unstable peace, about secret orders and dirty operations, about men who were useful to power as long as they stayed silent. Some of them went straight to video. Some were quietly dumped overseas. Some were marketed as disposable late-night background noise. Yet, inside their clumsy dialogue and explosive finales, they carried something the bigger films often avoided: an unease about who holds the trigger, who rewrites the mission, and who pays when peacekeeping becomes an excuse. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. Film 1: Midnight Man, 1995. There is a strange quiet around Midnight Man, as if the film itself knows it was built for darkness. On paper, it was another direct-to-video action thriller, a lone operative, a vanished formula, and a mission no one wants to claim. But behind its grainy visuals and cold industrial sets lies a story that feels less like fiction and more like a coded message about the era that produced it. Shot in South Africa with a modest budget and a cast of actors accustomed to playing men who operate outside the law, the film follows a former special operations soldier framed, hunted, and thrown into a game he never agreed to play. The surface sells it as a routine chase and fire adventure, the kind of movie designed to fill the shelves of VHS rental shops that smelled of carpet glue and rewound tape. But something else pulses beneath its straightforward plot: a tension about what happens when governments outsource their dirty work to men who no longer believe in the missions they're given. What Midnight Man hides inside its rough edges is a portrait of a world shifting into the shadows. The script went through several rewrites, stripping away political references that were considered too pointed. Studio notes insisted on minimizing dialogue about covert funding and unauthorized weapons testing. Even the ending was softened, replacing a bleak revelation with a more digestible final confrontation. It wasn't censorship in the traditional sense. It was the quiet trimming of truths that felt uncomfortably close to real operations from that decade. And yet, the film never fully loses its original pulse. Beneath the explosions and chases, you can sense the filmmakers trying to say something about men abandoned by the systems they once served. A reminder that the midnight missions most people never hear about rarely end with parades or medals, only with a name erased and a story rewritten. Film 2: The Order, 2001. There is an uncanny weight to The Order, as if the film itself were built on forgotten scripture. On the surface, it was marketed as a hybrid of action and mysticism, a rogue adventurer, a secret religious sect, an artifact that could tilt the balance between salvation and ruin. But beneath that familiar setup lies a production shaped by tension, rewrites, and an unspoken fear of touching subjects considered too sensitive for mainstream audiences at the time. Set against the crumbling stone corridors of Jerusalem and Rome, the film follows an excommunicated priest turned mercenary drawn into a centuries-old conflict. The cinematic promise was clear: ancient conspiracies, shadow orders, and a world where faith becomes a weapon. It should have been bold. It should have embraced its own darkness. Instead, the studio warred with the script, sanding down its sharpest edges. Early drafts contained direct commentary about manipulation within religious institutions, but those lines disappeared after early test screenings warned of potential backlash. Even the film's visual tone was altered. The director originally leaned toward a bleak, almost apocalyptic palette, reflecting the moral decay at the heart of the story. But studio executives demanded a brighter finish, insisting that audiences wanted spectacle, not introspection. The final cut replaced slow, meditative sequences with faster, louder action sequences that were easier to market, but stripped the narrative of its original soul. And then there is the matter of the lost ending. According to several crew members, the film originally closed on a revelation that questioned the very nature of authority, religious, political, and moral. The studio deemed it too confrontational, resulting in a safer conclusion that wraps the conflict but leaves the truth untouched. The shadow of that missing sequence hangs over the entire film, turning the order into a story that feels incomplete by design. What remains is a haunting echo of what the filmmakers tried to say, that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones buried in ancient texts, but the ones modern institutions refuse to acknowledge. Film 3 Night of the Warrior, 1991. There is something strangely hypnotic about Night of the Warrior. On the surface, it looks like a stylish, neon-lit action romance, a drifter who owes money to the wrong people, underground fights, and a love story caught between violence and redemption. But beneath its glossy veneer is a film that feels like it was trying to say something deeper, something the marketing never acknowledged, and the studio never seemed comfortable with. Shot at the tail end of the 80 seconds action boom, the film carries the aesthetic of a world that pretends it's glamorous, even as it rots from within. The protagonist, a dancer, a fighter, an outsider, moves through clubs soaked in sweat and smoke, owned by men who believe control is a language spoken only with fists. The surface story sells itself easily. A reluctant hero forced back into a world he swore he'd abandoned, fighting not for glory but survival. The VHS cover promised underground combat and adrenaline, the kind of movie teenagers rented for a weekend thrill. But hidden beneath the romance and bruised knuckles is something the studio seemed unsure how to handle. Early drafts leaned heavily into themes of exploitation, not just in the underground fighting circuits, but in the entertainment industry itself. The main character was originally written as someone who had been chewed up by systems that profited from his body, whether he was dancing on a stage or bleeding in a ring. Those themes were trimmed, softened, or removed to avoid pushing the film into uncomfortable territory. The love story itself was a late-stage addition, intended to lighten a script that was once far darker. And then there is the fight choreography, or rather, the way it was edited. Several scenes were cut not because they were too violent, but because they implied the wrong people were profiting from the pain of others. The final cut masks those implications with music, lighting, and fast transitions, burying the film's original commentary beneath a layer of cinematic gloss. What remains is a stylish, strangely melancholic film about a man who refuses to be owned even as the movie itself shows signs of being shaped, softened, and restrained by forces outside the frame. It's a reminder that sometimes the loudest truths are the ones the edit tries to mute. Film 4, The Base 2. There is a severity to The Base 2 that goes beyond its straightforward military thriller packaging. At first glance, it's another story about a rogue soldier, a corrupt commanding officer, and a mission warped by personal agendas. It fits neatly into the late 90 seconds action landscape uniforms, desert heat, tense standoffs, and explosions meant to echo the anxieties of a world redefining its enemies. But beneath the surface lies a film shaped by the quiet pressure of a political climate no one wanted to confront openly. Produced in the early 2000s and shot under tight scheduling, the movie follows an undercover operative infiltrating a military outpost turned criminal enterprise. It is a familiar setup: loyalty twisted into leverage, authority turned into personal profit, and soldiers trapped between duty and survival. The studio sold it as a simple conflict between good and evil, a battle where one righteous man could restore order through force. But the script once carried something more complicated, a portrait of institutional decay, of the blurred line between sanctioned missions and off-the-books operations. That complexity never made it intact to the final cut. Internal notes demanded the removal of scenes that hinted at real-world scandals involving private contractors and unauthorized military actions abroad. Dialogue that questioned the chain of command was toned down or replaced. Even the antagonist, originally written as a symbol of systemic corruption, was reshaped into a more digestible caricature, not a product of the system, but an isolated bad seed. And the most revealing change came during post-production. Early assemblies of the film reportedly ended with a bleak revelation about the true scope of the illegal operations, one that implicated far more than the small group shown on screen. That ending was discarded. The studio wanted closure, not consequence. The final scene reframes the entire conflict as a self-contained incident, ensuring audiences leave without asking larger questions. Yet The Base 2 still carries traces of its original intent. There are moments where the camera lingers too long on silent soldiers, men trapped between orders and conscience. Moments where the desert doesn't feel like a battleground, but a burial ground for truths no one wanted to unearth. It is a film shaped by edits designed to protect more than just pacing edits meant to ensure the viewer never looks beyond the frame. Film 5, The Peacekeeper, 1997. There is an irony embedded in The Peacekeeper, a film about preventing catastrophe that itself feels like a record of a crisis no one wanted to name. Marketed as a high-octane political thriller, it follows a soldier striving to stop a nuclear threat after a government betrayal spirals out of control. It carried the look and tempo of late 90s action cinema. Sweeping military shots, tight close-ups of classified briefings, and a hero caught between loyalty and truth. But beneath that familiar shape lies a story softened, redirected, and reshaped by the geopolitical anxieties of its time. Set against the tense backdrop of post-Cold War uncertainty, the film originally leaned much harder into commentary about nuclear custody, fractured alliances, and military operations conducted without oversight. Early drafts reportedly included pointed references to real-world mishandling of weapons and the tension between elected officials and covert agencies. Those lines vanished. Studio executives feared the script's realism might cross a line they weren't willing to defend. After the first table read, several scenes were flagged as too revealing. And what followed was a systematic removal of details that connected the film's fiction to events still fresh in the public memory. The changes didn't stop at the dialogue. The villain was rewritten multiple times, at first a reflection of institutional rot, then a rogue operative, then a simplified extremist driven by personal vendetta. Each rewrite pushed the story further away from systemic critique and closer to a digestible narrative where one hero could restore order through willpower alone. It made for a cleaner plot, but a far less honest one. Even the action sequences bear traces of compromise. The original climax reportedly ended on an ambiguous note, a moment where the hero realizes the threat was never just the stolen weapon, but the machinery of power that allowed it to vanish in the first place. That ending was replaced with a more traditional victory, complete with a symbolic reset meant to reassure audiences rather than challenge them. And yet, the film still flickers with remnants of the truth it once tried to confront. Glimpses of institutional distrust, whispered warnings about oversight, and the uneasy notion that the greatest dangers are born not from external enemies, but from silence within the systems meant to protect us. It is a film caught between two impulses: the urge to entertain, and the impulse to reveal something the world wasn't quite ready to hear. Bonus fact: The Quiet Weapon. Unreleased project. There is a ghost of a film that never officially existed, whispered about in production circles under a working title that changed so many times no one can agree on the final one. Crew members called it The Quiet Weapon, though no studio ever listed it. It was conceived in the late 90s, written during a period when action cinema flirted with the idea of truth but rarely dared to hold it. The project followed a covert intelligence unit operating in a gray zone between diplomacy and warfare men, who carried out missions denied on paper but fully sanctioned off the record. The script was unsettling not because of its violence but because of its accuracy. Early readers claimed it mirrored real-world incidents that had surfaced in classified leaks operations in remote regions, unregistered weapons transfers, and diplomatic crises resolved quietly before anyone knew they'd begun. The production moved forward cautiously, with a small cast and a director known for turning limited budgets into tense, grounded thrillers. But as shooting began, the project encountered a series of abrupt obstacles: permits revoked without explanation, locations suddenly rendered unavailable, funding reduced mid-schedule. The clearest sign came during post-production. Rough cuts revealed a film too close to a truth no one would publicly acknowledge. Scenes depicting unauthorized military interventions, coded political messages, and whispered references to real covert agencies reportedly alarmed the studio's legal team. What followed was not an argument, but a disappearance. The film was pulled from the schedule, its footage archived, and its crew released from further obligations. No official cancellation was announced. It simply faded. Only fragments survive: a few stills, a partial soundtrack, a script draft that circulates quietly among collectors. A film that never reached the screen, not because it failed, but because it revealed too much. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. In the end, these 5 films, fragments of a decade caught between old enemies and new uncertainties, reveal more in their silences than in their explosions. Midnight Man with its trimmed politics, The Order softened by fear of controversy, Night of the Warrior reshaped into style over confession. The Base too edited into obedience. And the Peacekeeper redirected away from the questions it was afraid to ask. Each one carries the echo of a truth once written into its pages. A truth later blurred by notes, cuts, and compromises, meant to keep audiences entertained but unprovoked. But even after the edits, something remains, a shadow beneath the action. A quiet suggestion that the dangers we're told to fear are often smaller than the ones left unspoken. These films remind us that cinema isn't only shaped by what directors shoot, it's shaped by what studios hide, soften, or erase. In their rough edges and missing lines, we glimpse the stories behind the stories, the version of events that flickers just outside the frame. And now the question passes to you. What do you think these films were trying to say before the edits took their truth away? Real secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.